The wind howled in long, mournful wails, a wild sound that pierced through the steel shell of the old truck. Outside the window, the world was a furious blur of white. The snowflakes, thick as a curtain, relentlessly lashed against the windshield, pushing the wipers to their limit. We had been driving for over 12 hours without a break, trying to cross the mountain range before the forecasted blizzard hit. Clearly, we had failed. "We can't go any further," Liam shouted over the roaring engine, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Zero visibility. I sat in the passenger seat, my heart pounding in my chest. In the back, Maya and Chloe were silent, their faces reflecting our tension. This winding mountain road, dangerous even in the best conditions, had now become a death trap. The truck skidded. A violent jolt sent us all lurching forward, before it came to an abrupt stop, one side sinking deep into the thick snow on the shoulder. The engine coughed a few times and then died. The sudden silence that followed was almost more terrifying than the storm's roar. We were stranded, completely isolated in a nameless wilderness with no phone signal, and the winter storm growing fiercer by the minute. For a moment, despair filled the cramped space of the truck. That's when Maya pointed out the window, her voice trembling. Through the dense curtain of snow, a dark shape loomed, a square structure set back among the trees, a log cabin. It looked abandoned, but right now it was our only glimmer of hope. It took us nearly half an hour to wade through the waist-deep snow to reach the house. The log cabin was larger than it first appeared, built from dark logs now weathered by time and the elements. The roof sagged in the middle as if it might collapse at any moment, and the windows were boarded up, like blind eyes staring into the storm. A heavy, oppressive feeling hung over the place, a stagnant air that seemed undisturbed for years. The front door was locked, but Liam, with the strength of desperation, found a loose board on a kitchen window and pried it off, creating an opening just large enough for us to squeeze through. Inside, the air was bone-chillingly cold and musty. The weak light from our flashlights swept over furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. An armchair was overturned, shattered glass crunched under our feet, and a sour, unpleasant smell lingered in the air. Still escaping the biting wind outside brought a fragile sense of relief. We found a stone fireplace and, luckily, a pile of dry firewood nearby. Soon, a small, flickering fire was born, casting a cozy circle of light and warmth amidst the surrounding cold and darkness. For a moment, we could almost relax. That false sense of security didn't last. While searching for blankets in the upstairs rooms, Chloe found a locked door at the end of the hallway. It was different from the others. It was reinforced with an iron bar across it. Curiosity, or perhaps an unnamed sense of dread, compelled us. Liam used a fireplace poker to pry the lock open. The door swung open to reveal a small, windowless room. The first thing that hit us was a thick stench, the smell of something long decayed. My flashlight beam swept across the room and landed on a stack of yellowed old newspapers in the corner. The headline on the top paper was in large, bold letters: "Family murdered in Winter Lodge, killer vanishes." None of us said a word. We stood there stunned, reading every line. The article told the story of the Winterhalder family, who had mysteriously disappeared from this lodge 15 years ago. It wasn't until spring, when the snow melted, that their bodies were discovered. Police believed they had been stalked and methodically murdered by an unknown assailant. The killer was never caught. This cabin wasn't just abandoned. It was haunted by a brutal past. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It became heavy, menacing. The storm outside was no longer our only enemy. Fear began to seep into every corner of our consciousness. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind whistling through the broken window panes made us jump. I started to get the feeling that we were not alone. The sensation of being watched, an unsettling awareness that eyes were on us from the darkness, grew more and more palpable. I was the first to see it. While looking out the shattered living room window, I caught a glimpse of a figure moving at the edge of the forest, just beyond the reach of the fireplace's glow. It was just a faint shadow, a tall, slender shape that almost blended in with the snow-covered tree trunks. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks on me in the dim light and swirling snow. But the chill that ran down my spine wasn't from the room's temperature. Then, other signs began to appear. Liam, while stepping outside to gather more firewood, discovered a single, fresh footprint in the snow right below a bedroom window, a footprint that belonged to none of us. Inside the house, we found an old children's doll placed neatly on a chair, though we were certain the chair had been empty before. It seemed someone was playing a sick psychological game with us, arranging things to maximize our terror. As the night deepened, so did our fear. We huddled closer to the fireplace, our only weapons the fire pokers and our mounting dread. We heard noises outside, the crunch of footsteps in the snow, a low, monotonous whistle carried on the wind. It was clear someone was circling the cabin, watching, waiting. Then the attempts to get in began. Not forceful banging or breaking down the door. It was more subtle, more terrifying. The handle on the front door began to turn slowly, back and forth. A faint scratching sound came from a side window. The person outside was in no hurry. He seemed to be savoring our fear, drawing out the tension. It was a battle of nerves and we were losing. Liam, always the most hot-headed, couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed a poker and yelled that he was going out to confront whoever was there. Maya and I tried to stop him, arguing that staying put and being quiet was the safest option. But silence was no longer an option. A loud noise from the basement froze us all. Someone had gotten inside, perhaps through a forgotten basement window or a rickety entrance we had overlooked. The slow, deliberate sound of footsteps began to echo from below, moving across the old wooden floor. He was in the house, the game had changed. This was no longer about waiting. It was a hunt. We extinguished the fire, plunging ourselves into near total darkness, hoping it would conceal us. The large cabin had now transformed into a deadly maze. We held our breath, listening to the footsteps growing closer. He was coming up the stairs. Each creak of the steps was a knife thrust into the silence. We retreated deeper into the living room, hiding behind the broken furniture. I could hear my own heart hammering in my ears. He reached the top floor, his footsteps now echoing on the same floorboards as us. He moved slowly, sweeping a flashlight through the rooms. Its cold beam cut through the darkness, passing just inches from our hiding spot. Chloe let out a sob, a tiny sound, but in the tense silence it was like a gunshot. The flashlight beam immediately shot towards her. A tall figure stood in the doorway, his face obscured by the darkness behind the light. Liam roared and charged forward, swinging the poker. There was a short sound, a choked scream, and then Liam fell. Chloe screamed, a horrific sound swallowed by the howling wind outside. Maya and I didn't wait. We ran. We burst out the back door into the blinding blizzard, heedless of the cold or the dark. Behind us, the cabin door remained open, casting a faint sliver of light onto the snow. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, pulling Maya behind me, tears freezing on my cheeks. Dawn began to break. The storm had subsided, leaving a silent, white world. We found our way back to the main road, exhausted and numb with cold. But the final image that haunts me isn't the snow or the darkness. It's the hazy figure of that man, standing in the cabin doorway, not pursuing, simply watching us disappear into the night. He didn't need to chase us. He had already taken what he wanted. We had escaped, but a part of us, along with Liam and Chloe, was left behind, trapped forever in the silence of that winter lodge. The offer came to me on a gloomy October afternoon, when the last of the leaves had let go, and the city seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the cold to rush in. It was a job so simple it was absurd, to watch over a mountain resort villa through the winter, from November until the snows melted at the end of March. The woman who contacted me, her voice low and formal over the phone, explained that the resort would be completely closed, and they just needed someone there to ensure everything remained intact, that no pipes burst or roofs collapsed under the weight of the snow. The salary they offered was extraordinary, enough that I wouldn't have to worry about a thing for the next few years. The place was unoccupied, they said, and my only job was to monitor it. I agreed without hesitation. I had been craving solitude, an absolute stillness to wash away the noise of my old life. I had no idea that silence has fangs of its own. The resort was perched precariously on a remote mountainside, a collection of modern stone and glass structures that looked out of place amidst the untamed wilderness. The single road leading up to it would be completely blocked by snow in just a few weeks. The The manager handed me the keys, showed me the surveillance room with its wall of security monitors, and a comfortable staff apartment. He also specifically told me not to worry about the storage building in the basement, saying they were sealed to store furniture and were outside my responsibilities. With me was Balto, a husky mix I had adopted, a large creature with ice blue eyes and a strange, quiet composure. His presence was a comfort in this vast, empty space. The first few weeks passed in a near-perfect peace. I spent my days walking the trails dusted with the first snow, reading by the fireplace, and watching the world turn white through the massive glass walls. Balto was always by my side, a silent shadow. At night, the silence was profound, broken only by the sound of wind whistling through the building's crevices. I slept deeply, a dreamless sleep I hadn't known in years. I thought I had found the perfect refuge, a sanctuary of silence. The change began subtly, almost imperceptibly. It was a late afternoon in November. I was sitting in the living room reading, when a sense of unease crept into my mind, a feeling that I was not alone. I looked up, out the window. There was only falling snow, a white curtain that blurred the line between earth and sky. Balto, who had been curled at my feet, suddenly lifted his head. His ears perked, and he began to let out a low, quiet growl, a sound that rumbled deep in his chest. His eyes were fixed on the dark hallway that led to the guest wing. I called his name, but he didn't respond, his entire body tense, focused on something I couldn't see. After that night, things began to drift from their normal course. I started to feel that presence more often, as if an invisible pair of eyes was watching me from the shadows. Paranoia began to take root in my mind, sharp and cold. I developed a habit of checking the locks multiple times before bed, a pointless act in a desolate place dozens of miles from civilization. One morning, I woke to find the door leading from the main house to the garage, a door I was certain I had locked the night before, was now bolted from the inside. I tried to reassure myself it was my memory, that the isolation was affecting my mind. But the explanation never truly satisfied me. Balto grew increasingly agitated. He no longer lay peacefully beside me. Instead, he constantly patrolled the house, stopping at dark corners and closed doors to bark angrily. Sometimes he would stand motionless for hours, staring at the wall of an empty room, his tail tucked and the fur on his neck raised. His behavior deepened my fear. Dogs don't imagine things. One night, a massive snowstorm hit. The wind howled like a tortured creature, and the snow fell so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the windows. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I was woken by some disturbance. Balto was standing on the bed, growling fiercely toward the bedroom door. I sat up listening. Over the roar of the storm, I seemed to sense a slow movement out in the hallway. Not a sound, but a change in the air, a vibration through the floor. I locked the bedroom door after that, not because anything specific had happened, but because I was starting to feel strangely unsafe. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a white, silent world. I felt utterly drained, nauseous, and aching all over. I decided to stay inside all day, lying on the sofa and watching old movies with the volume low. As the day wore on, the fear inside me grew. It was no longer a vague paranoia. It had become a firm belief that someone else was in the house with me. Late in the afternoon, I decided I had to get out, if only for a little while. I walked a circuit around the property, checking the exterior doors. Everything seemed normal, but when I passed the basement door, the one the manager had told me not to enter, I stopped. A draft of cold, foul air and a sour, cloying smell, something heavy and bitter in the air, was seeping out from under the door. And then I saw it, a dark, reddish streak on the floor right outside the doorframe. My brain shut down. I didn't think, didn't speak, just stood there, frozen in place. Then, as if some primal instinct took over, I turned and ran. I ran back to my apartment, slammed the door and jammed a chair under the handle, an act I'd only ever seen in movies. I grabbed the satellite phone, my hands shaking, and tried to call the manager, but there was no signal. The storm must have damaged the equipment. I was completely cut off. I huddled in a corner of the room, Balto beside me, growling continuously. Through the crack under the door, I saw the hallway light suddenly vanish. A shadow had blocked it. I held my breath. The shadow didn't move, just shifted slightly as if someone was standing right outside, rocking slowly back and forth. I couldn't see feet, but I knew someone was there on the other side of the thin wooden door. Time seemed to stop. I sat there, rigid and silent, until the light returned and I felt the faint shift of the floorboards as the person walked away. I didn't sleep for the next 3 days. I sat in that room, the chair still wedged under the door, eating only the ration bars I had on hand. Balto never left my side. When the satellite phone signal finally returned, I called the manager. I screamed into the phone, my voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. He sounded surprised and promised to send someone up as soon as the road was cleared. When they arrived, I already had my things packed. The local police were there too. They swept the entire property. They didn't find anyone, but the sliding glass door in one of the main bedrooms was wide open, despite the thick snow piled outside it. Behind the curtain in a corner was a pile of food wrappers and empty water bottles. Nothing had been stolen. There were no signs of forced entry. The manager said everything was in its place, but whoever had been there had been living in that room for some time. That room looked directly out into the living room, meaning they could have been watching me the entire day. I lay on the sofa, too sick and afraid to move. The police also opened the basement door. The stench was so overwhelming it made them recoil. Inside, they found another makeshift living space, and something wrapped in a tarp in a far corner. They didn't tell me what it was, but the looks on their faces said everything. I left immediately after, never looking back. They transferred the full payment into my account, a silence bought at a steep price. I never found out what they discovered in that basement, or who had been living in the shadows of the resort with me. Was it someone connected to the owners, or just a drifter seeking shelter? And why did they leave me alone? Those questions haunt me. To this day, I still can't stay in a new house without checking every closet, every lock. Sometimes, on cold winter nights when the snow is falling outside my window, I swear I can feel it again. That sensation of being watched by something unseen in the dark. I picture the shadow under the door, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for another winter. That fear has become a part of me, a silent companion much like Balto once was. I went searching for solitude, and I found it. But in that solitude, I discovered a more terrifying truth. You are never truly alone. The snow began in November, and from then on, it seemed as though it never stopped. I'd come to this log cabin to run away, to escape the city, to escape the soulless faces, and above all, to escape the silence in my own apartment, where every corner echoed with the voice of someone who was no longer there. This place, deep in an isolated valley in the northern mountains, promised a different kind of silence, a primal quiet wrapped in the howl of wind through pine trees and the heavy stillness of snow. I needed that isolation to finish my novel, or at least that's what I told everyone. For the first month, the solitude was sweet. I wrote, I read, I walked through the whitened forest, the frigid air making my chest ache in a pleasant way. My world shrank to just 4 wooden walls, the crackling fire in the hearth, and the blank pages waiting to be filled. I hadn't seen another soul. That was until I met Elias. He appeared on a gray afternoon when the snow was falling so thick it blurred the line between the earth and the sky. He stood at the edge of my porch, nearly blending into the storm, a tall figure in a heavy coat. He carried a bundle of firewood, saying he was the caretaker for the property, and noticed my chimney was no longer smoking. He was worried I might have run into some trouble. I was appreciative, though my fire was burning just fine and my own woodpile was still full. He had an agreeable smile, but his eyes did not. They were the color of ice, deep and still like a frozen lake, and they seemed to look straight through me. He lingered longer than necessary, talking endlessly about the winter, about the animals, about previous tenants. At first I found his presence pleasant, a break from the monotonous solitude. But there was something in the way he spoke, an almost desperate eagerness that made me uncomfortable. When he left, I felt a strange sense of relief, and I locked the deadbolt more carefully than usual. After that, Elias's visits became more frequent. He would appear without warning, sometimes leaving a trout he'd caught on the steps, other times knocking at dusk just to ask if I needed anything. Each time the conversation stretched longer, and he pushed a little closer into my personal space. He started commenting on my habits. "You seem to enjoy sitting by the west window in the mornings," he said once, and the blood in my veins seemed to freeze. That window looked out over a dense patch of forest with no trail. There was no way he could have seen me from there. Unease began to seep into my solitude, tainting it. I started to feel watched. Sometimes, when I glanced out at night, I would get the feeling of a figure standing among the trees, right at the edge of the light cast from my window. But when I blinked, the figure would be gone. I told myself it was just a writer's imagination, my mind fatigued by the prolonged isolation. The biggest storm of the winter hit on a Tuesday. It wasn't just snow, it was a furious, screaming wall of white that swallowed everything. The power went out. The cabin was plunged into a darkness and silence broken only by the roar of the wind. I was prepared for this with candles, flashlights, and plenty of food. What I wasn't prepared for was the knock on the door. It was Elias. Snow caked his shoulders and hair, making him look like a phantom of winter. He said the roads were completely blocked and he'd come to make sure I was okay. This time I didn't invite him in, but he stepped over the threshold anyway, bringing with him a blast of frigid air and an unmistakable sense of menace. He walked straight to the fireplace and stoked the flames. He moved through my cabin with an alarming familiarity. "A storm this big is dangerous," he said, his voice low and even. "We have to stay together to be safe." "We," the word hung in the air between us. I stood frozen by the door, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the outdoors. Suddenly I realized I had made a terrible mistake in coming here. I had sought isolation, and now it had become a trap. Elias began to talk, and this time he wasn't talking about the weather or idle gossip. He spoke of loneliness, a deep, rotting loneliness that had eaten away at him over his years alone on this mountain. He talked about the people who came and went, people from the city like me, who only saw this place as a temporary escape, never understanding it, never belonging to it. He spoke of watching me for a long time, since before he had even knocked that first time. He described the book I was reading, the kind of tea I drank, even the way I frowned when I was writing. He wasn't smiling anymore. His icy blue eyes now burned with a strange fire, a mixture of longing and resentment. He told me about his past, fragmented stories of violence, of loss, of an uncontrollable rage. He said I was the only one who truly saw him, that we had a special connection. My entire body was rigid, but I tried to keep my expression calm, nodding politely, hoping not to provoke the beast sitting in front of me. The situation escalated when I said I needed to get some sleep. "Sleep?" he asked, his voice full of wounded surprise. "But our night has just begun." He stood up and walked toward the main door. I heard a small dry click. He had thrown the deadbolt. The cabin was now a prison. "To keep things from getting in," he said, turning back to me. And in the flickering firelight, his face twisted into something I no longer recognized. It was not the face of a helpful neighbor. It was the face of hunger. Adrenaline flooded my system. My mind screamed, searching for an escape. The windows were snowed in and barred. There was only one door. I knew I couldn't confront him physically. He was bigger, stronger. I had to use my wits. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from trembling. I told him the backup generator in the shed might still work, that if we had power we could turn on the electric heaters and be much warmer. I said it casually, as if I completely accepted that we would get through the storm together. For a moment, he seemed suspicious. He stared at me, his eyes searching. But then the thought of comfort, of restoring some small order, seemed to appeal to him. He nodded and walked toward the back door that led to the shed. It was a thinner door without an indoor deadbolt. It was my only chance. The moment he turned his back to unlatch the back door, I moved. I didn't run for the front door. Instead, I bolted into the small bathroom, slammed the thick oak door shut, and turned the old metal lock just as he realized what was happening. He roared, an inhuman sound. He threw himself against the door, his full body weight shaking the entire frame. I pressed myself into the farthest corner, my heart hammering in my chest. I could hear him outside, sometimes pleading, sometimes cursing, sometimes promising the terrible things he would do once he got inside. The wooden door groaned but held. I was in there for hours, maybe the whole night. The storm outside and the storm on the other side of the door merged into a symphony of chaos. Then, gradually, as the first hints of dawn filtered through the tiny bathroom window, the noises outside ceased. I waited. The silence was more terrifying than the screaming. I waited until the sun was high in the sky, until I couldn't bear it any longer. Trembling, I unlocked the door. The cabin was empty. The fire in the hearth was nearly dead. Elias was gone. The back door was wide open, letting in snow and wind. On the table where I did my writing, he had left something. It was one of my photographs, the only one I had brought with me. A picture of me and her. He had used a knife to slash her face from the photograph, leaving only mine. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone. I just packed my things, threw them in my car, and drove. I didn't stop until the mountains were just a hazy line in my rearview mirror. Months later, when spring arrived and the snow began to melt, I read a small news brief online. Local authorities had found a body in the woods near the valley where I had stayed. A man, identified as the caretaker for the properties, had died of exposure during the blizzard back in January. They called it an accident, but I knew better. I knew the madness had been burning him from the inside out, and when I locked that door, I had snuffed out his only source of heat. Sometimes on quiet nights, I still feel as if he's standing just outside my window, in the darkness, waiting, with his eyes the color of ice.